Aloha everyone, I'm Lila Mower, President of Kokua Council. Welcome to our July 11th, 2022 meeting with the candidates for House District 25. Kim Coco Iwamoto is with us. We invited all candidates. We haven't heard back from Rob Novak, hope he joins us. We heard from Scott Saiki that he has a conflict in schedule, but hopefully he'll be able to join us too. I want everyone to feel like they're sitting at my kitchen table because I'm sitting at my dining table. So please be comfortable. We have a bunch of questions to ask, but first, and I forgot to tell you, Kim, if you could introduce yourself, maybe give a 3 to 5 minute introduction. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you and revisit with you and about myself and my platform and solutions. So let me start with my history here in Hawaii. I returned home in 2001 and with a law degree, and my first job here as an attorney was with Volunteer Legal Services Hawaii on Queen Street. And actually, in reflecting on the different jobs and a lot of my work has been within the district. And so with there, I started off as a homeless outreach coordinator and then was promoted to managing attorney. And my main function was to coordinate free legal clinics in homeless shelters as well as community centers across the state. So I worked with mostly low-income individuals or homeless individuals, and we also tracked that we were serving a lot of victims of domestic violence as well. So that was the focus, and I loved it. It was there, one of the programs that we had under our umbrella was Project Visitation, and I became a volunteer there. And what Project Visitation volunteers did was we basically coordinated visits between foster children who were separated from their siblings by the foster care system. And so once a month, volunteers would coordinate and chauffeur and then chaperone visits between siblings who weren't living together. And it was through that experience that I ended up meeting all of these amazing foster parents. And I'm like, I think I want to try to be a foster parent. So I got licensed. You know, I didn't know much about it. I am a single person, single adult, openly trans. And I'm like, will they even accept me? So I went through the certification process, and I was a certified therapeutic foster parent. And I knew, and I explained to the social workers who, you know, are in charge of placement, I'm like, I know there are kids in the system who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered questioning, who are not being affirmed by their foster families. As well-intentioned and as good-hearted as they may be, I had a feeling that, and my feelings were correct. In fact, one of my first young people, my first foster kids to live with me, she was trans-identified, and one of her foster family shaved her hair off, throughout all of her girl clothes, and read her scripture. And when the social workers saw what they did to her, thank God I was certified and ready to go. They put her with me and they revoked the license of that family. So that was exactly the scenario I imagined. So in working with then I had over the course of my experience as a foster parent, I had 5 different teenagers all along that kind of rainbow. And it was in advocating for their educational access that I realized the Board of Education and the Department of Education, they were doing a really horrible job on bullying and harassment in the schools. And so when I testified on behalf of my children and the other students in the system about my concerns, they stared back at me with blank faces. And I'm like, that's not acceptable. There was no acknowledgement that they could do better. So I went back to my community and I'm like, I think we need to get a seat on the board and change it from the inside. And so that's what I did in 2006. I ran for the Board of Education and then eventually was reelected in 2010. But also while I was a foster parent, I left the practice of law and went into, I just bought in a small apartment building in the Ala Moana area, and that's where I live now. And so basically I fixed it up. It was owned by a family that had owned it since 1926, and I never really kept it up, and they kept the rents low, which is great. We love those kinds of landlords, but I had to fix it up, and that's what I did. And today, and that was in 2004. Today, more than 50% of my tenants are previously homeless or would be possibly homeless, but for their Section 8 subsidy. So and also during my time on the Civil Rights Commission, we're very aware and proactive in trying to address the discrimination that tenants face when trying to get an apartment and having a Section 8 voucher. But as we saw during the pandemic, one of the most reliable tenants many of us landlords had were those who had the backing of the government through their Section 8 voucher, because the government would provide if they lost their part-time job or they faced greater financial obstacles. So and that's where I am today. I'm not sure. Well, so again, I served in the Civil Rights Commission, and also I just want to share that when I was foster parenting, a lot of I would say a majority of the foster teenagers had been homeless before, and they had also and or had been incarcerated in the system. And more recently, I actually participated, well, several times now, in the point in time count, which is we survey all of our unsheltered neighbors across the state on one particular day, and then we collect the data and we extrapolate, and the information there is very telling, and I'd be happy to share that with you when we get to specific subject headings. But I'll leave that as my introduction for now.
You're muted, Lila.
Thank you. So just as a reminder to everyone, from this point on, we're going to go into speaker view. So if everyone except Kim will turn off your videos and keep yourselves muted until it's time to ask a question. We do have a couple of guests. So if any guest would like to ask a question, please use the hand raise icon and we'll recognize you. Okay, well, thank you, Kim. Our first question comes from Rick Tabor.
Thank you, Kim. Kind of interesting. Out of grad school, counseling psychology, my first job was helping develop in the state of Washington the therapeutic foster care program. And so I started there. I've been in the field for 46 years, and I'm one of the directors here with the Kokua Council. And we know you. We know you quite well. So I was just going to say, and Lila has thanked you. We got a lot of people coming in right now. Thank you for taking the time to participate in yet another Kokua Council forum. I feel like we've had the privilege of getting to know you and your incredible plans for the past several years. I really thank you for, well, being so honest, practical, and solution oriented. Your transparency is amazing and very much what we need right now. So here's my question. So Lila and I set up programs, and we ran into the same thing 2 years ago. So why do you think Speaker Saiki and now this Republican candidate also are unable to make the time to be on this Kokua Council forum with us yet again? So we've been here with you before. Yes. And in addition to that answer, and if he joins us, great. I would love it if he, what is this? Okay, okay. In addition to that, then please just describe the difference between your platform and the opponent's platforms. I've been reading some articles, and amazingly, the platforms are coming closer to what we've heard from you all along. But let's just go with that, okay?
Okay, so let me start by urging you not to take it personally. Scott Saiki avoids any kind of shared space with me. He didn't attend the Democratic candidate fair on Saturday. I'm sure he had another conflict in his very busy schedule. But he also doesn't, we fill out a lot of candidate questionnaires, and I'm happy to do so, and that's part of that transparency. But I guess, some incumbents feel that their record speaks for themselves, and voters should have to go look and read all of the numerous things they've done in the ledge. over 28 years. But you know, there's a lot of voters who just don't have that kind of time and would love to see, you know, a side-by-side analysis of candidates' responses to questions, like the League of Women Voters offers. For instance, last election, he did answer that one. That was one of the questionnaires he did answer. This year, he hasn't done so yet. Again, last year he didn't, you know, answer Civil Beat. And what was interesting, and I had to remind the media, the managers who were posting the media questionnaires, because what they were doing was holding the candidate responses until they collected all of the candidate responses for that race, and then they would upload them all at the same time. So what happened was, and it was very clever on his part, was that it basically then silenced my responses. And meanwhile, the voters had their ballots in their hand, and Civil Beat was, they told me, well, your opponent hasn't submitted his. I'm like, but he's not going to. And so this year they put it up, and they were like, we learned our lesson. And so they put it up right away, my responses, so that voters actually have time to go look at and read about what I'm offering. So how is it different? Thank you for pointing out that, you know, I mentioned kind of, you know, trying to be funny about it, that, you know, he had a really positive, what I would consider a positive session this last session. And it's funny, you know, singing him praises or patting himself on the back. And it's funny because it's like he's lip syncing to the lyrics on my website. Because yeah, a lot of the things I've written editorials on these issues. I've written public testimony about Red Hill. You know, and obviously I've spoken and written at length about the legislators' complete constitutional disregard of its lack of funding for DHHL. So that's been long-standing. And of course, minimum wage. We're not quite at a living wage, but at least he didn't follow lockstep with the Chamber of Commerce, which wanted him to like not elevate the poverty wages of working families. So yes, those three pillars of his 2022 session were exactly, and I've had neighbors in our district thank me for campaigning and for coming so close last election. And they're like, because he would have never done all of these things. At least that's their inclination. If you didn't, you know, be so clear and such a strong advocate for these issues that really do benefit the constituents in our district, not just the corporate lobbyists and not just luxury developers. So thank you for that softball question. I appreciate it. But yeah, so I think that's what's happening.
Thank you, Kim.
All right, I get to ask the next question. Kim, I think it was an article I saw in Civil Beat, and I apologize if it wasn't in Civil Beat, but it had something to do with legislators who are attorneys and their ability to, what's the right word? How in their other job as attorneys, they have some effect on our legislation. I don't know how to put it properly. And of course, I brought it up earlier, but I do have a concern about corruption. We hear so much about government corruption. And for those of us who advocate at the legislature, we see a lot of conflict of interest. So if you could address that, Kim, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Lila. So I just posted the link to the Civil Beat article Lila is mentioning. And I did that one early on. I think it was in February of, you know, as soon as it broke, I'm like, yeah, you know what, because I worked at the legislature for the 2021 session for Senator Laura Ocasio, and I got to see a lot of from the inside. Like, it's different when you work at the legislature and you're seeing the way the dynamics and the differences between what's happening in the House versus how things are run in the Senate. And that contrast is very telling. But yes, so one thing, the issue I think you're getting at is the one clause I put in, the one factor I put into the article, but it was also adopted in the form of a resolution. So my article then became a resolution that the Ala Moana Kakaako Neighborhood Board actually adopted, and they adopted this resolution that itemized and basically urged the legislature to stop corruption. And it basically bullet pointed the points in my Civil Beat article. And then the Democratic Party itself also took those bullet points, and 3 different county conventions adopted and forwarded on the resolution to the state. And then, and the 4th county didn't actually submit any resolutions. And then the state convention, the Democratic Party of Hawaii, they all voted en masse to adopt the resolution that contained, again, all of these elements except for term limits. And we could have a whole nother discussion on term limits. But the most critical issue I think that Lila was hitting on was the potential conflict of interest. And the lack of transparency there, because when you're a private practice attorney, there is a doctrine in law called attorney-client privilege or attorney-client confidentiality. It means you as an attorney, you're not allowed to disclose who your clients are, what their businesses are, or what business you're doing on their behalf. You're not allowed to unilaterally make that disclosure. So I want you to imagine this. So 3 of the most powerful legislators in the House, the most powerful legislators in the House are all private practice attorneys. So imagine this, Ty Cullen and Kalani English, if they were also private practice attorneys, that whole corruption scandal, the bribery issue would not have come to light. Number 1, Milton Choi, if he hired them, for instance, if he gave them envelopes of cash, $5,000, and handed it to them, it could have been accepted and deposited as retainers for legal services had they been private practice attorneys. Now, if they were an active attorney like I am, then you can't accept client funds. But if you're an active status attorney like these 3 legislative leaders are, then you can accept that money, and there's no disclosure of it, right? So Milton Choi could have then asked them, hey, I need these bills introduced, I need these bills passed, or I need this bill killed. How can you help me with in your legal capacity, right? And so these individuals could turn around and give him the same service, but then they wouldn't have been arrested. The sting couldn't have happened because it would have been all done secretly, or it would have been protected activity. So even if Milton Choi was wearing a bug, the defense would be, well, I'm allowed to represent my clients. So that is an issue, and I'm so happy that the Democratic Party of Hawaii is willing to check its own Democratic representatives on this issue to say, hey, you shouldn't be in a position of leadership where you have unilateral power to do so many things on behalf of clients that we don't even know about. Of course, there's the other, so that's that issue, but of course there's the other issue of, in their House rules, both the Senate and the House have actually added in language into how they're going to operate. And they have completely, I mean, it's offensive. They actually wrote in, and it's the leadership who's writing these clauses into the rules, and then the body votes on it, but they're not going to challenge leadership. But one of the rules is that they said the Speaker or the Senate President can waive conflicts. And I don't know, many of us have seen that episode on that online, I can't remember his name, somebody could put it in the chat, but where Joe Suki actually, I think it was Joe Suki, actually disclosed that he had been a paid lobbyist for the plastics industry, and they were voting on an item that would impact his client. And so he disclosed, and then whoever was leading from the podium, because he stepped back, said, "Oh, you don't have a conflict, I waive your conflict." I mean, that is completely offensive to any reasonable person. Another thing that the legislature did was they amended the definition of what a state employee is under the state ethics laws. So all state employees must comply with the state ethics laws. But the legislature, in their creative ways, said, wait a minute, we're going to redefine state employee to exempt ourselves. Even though we get a paycheck, we get state benefits, we get state pension, we're going to say we're not state employees for the purposes of ethics. And again, that's really, how do they get away with this? But they do, and they never even bother to change any of this. And then, of course, the pay-to-play, influence peddling that was addressed. And what they did, they kind of basically went through the motions of addressing that by saying, oh, you can't hold a fundraiser. But nothing, and many of us in the community raised this issue. We said, wait a minute, they can still send emails and letters and make phone calls to say, hey, can you give me a contribution during session, and they could receive the contribution. So they could do all the fundraising without the hassle of throwing a party. Basically, that's the law, that's the bill that made it through to address corruption in the legislature. And that's just ridiculous. So the other issue is unilateral power and control. The current representative is obviously the Speaker of the House, and under his leadership, it's very, very authoritarian, very top down. And so that actually in itself breeds the kind of corruption, the climate of corruption that would allow somebody like Ty Cullen or Kalani English to, and specifically Ty Cullen, because he was in the House, to have the credibility to say, I can make this happen. Because when power is not questioned, when everything, if you raise any kind of issue or concern, if you're part of the body and not part of leadership, that would be very threatening, and you would be punished for that kind of, challenge to the way things are done. So one of the other clauses that I put into my article that made it into the resolutions was that if there's a bill that's introduced or sponsored by a majority, meaning for the House, it would be 26 representatives signed on to a bill, then it should automatically get a first hearing. And then once it has a first hearing, it should not get deferred indefinitely, or there should be no kind of action taken without a vote of the entire committee, a roll call vote. That would keep, what we saw from happening, which is a unilateral, legislative leader or a committee chair or vice chair from deferring a bill without any kind of, accountability. So those two things, introducing and then not deferring without a vote, super important. That's very important. And so whoever is, hopefully I get through this election, and whoever is speaker, I'm going to obviously spend my time leading up to being sworn in, meeting with as many representatives as possible to say, hey, we have an opportunity for a new day. We can bring back representational democracy to the House. Like every 51 of us who made it here into this chamber worked really hard to campaign, and we sacrificed, we made promises to our constituents. Let's create a collaborative environment where we can bring our best ideas forward and not have it handed down to us what we're allowed to do. And then anything that we say, but we can make it better, is not going to be met with, how dare you? How dare you try to upstage or, hijack this bill that leadership has, allowed to move forward. So that's what I hope will happen, if the voters do give me this opportunity to serve them.
Thank you, Kim. And let's see, just as a reminder, Kokua Council, we're advocates. We cover a wide range of issues. So here comes Kathy Wyatt. Kathy, your question, please.
Hi, Kim. First of all, I want to tell you, you got the most infectious smile. It just makes me smile while I'm listening to you.
Thank you.
Anyway, my question is not nearly as juicy as the one about corruption. But as you know, the state is suffering, well, the whole nation is suffering from lack of workforce, caregivers, nursing homes, hospitals, home care, whatever. There are a lot of us private schools. I have a CNA school, and there are others like me as well. And I have very low prices for the school, but it's about a third, almost a half to a third less, 2/3 less than the major schools. Anyway, my point is, because there are so many, it's just a shortage. And a lot of the reasons we don't have students in these classes is because of the cost. No matter how low we go, we still have that problem. Can you see any way that the state could help these people get funding for these schools so they could get a job and help out with the workforce shortage?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Yes, they're doing it for teachers right now, and also I think they're doing it. There is a kind of a contract program with I know a friend of mine just graduated from the School of Social Work, and she was given an opportunity to have she was given tuition in exchange for signing a contract that she would be working then for 4 years, I believe, for a state agency. She actually thought she can get paid more money and do other things, so she actually bought her contract out. That kind of deal, you're allowed to just pay that money back. And then go into a different field if you want to. So there is a template there, and I think we should be expanding it. I mean, personally, I think we totally could find a way, and I believe there are resources out there, tax generating revenue out there, that we should be able to offer, free public school education, preschool through college for Hawaii residents. There's a lot of taxes that we're not collecting. Obviously, REITs, real estate investment trusts, right? A lot of these storage units, and Ala Moana shopping center, a lot of shopping centers, a lot of hotels are owned and operated under a REIT, which has all this tax exempt status. So even though, like for myself, I, as a private landlord who owns real estate, and that's part of my business, I pay taxes, right, on all of my proceeds, on my profit. But then if it was held in this REIT, they have a huge loophole, and that's not fair. And there's so much more we could be doing with that revenue, such as investing it in education, investing it into our workforce. And another issue on this topic, so that's really breaks my heart, is even with MedQuest, Medicaid, if people are supposed to be getting home help aides to help them with daily life issues, sometimes what's happening is the service providers, because there's a cap on how much they can bill, whereas, and so these service providers aren't able to hire people at such a low cap, right? And so they can't hire them. And then they also have, their agencies are also sending out private paying, they're sending out their workers to private individuals who can pay above and beyond. So it's depleting the people who rely on Medicaid, Medicare, and even some of their insurance. And so it's going to people who can pay out of pocket. And so they're saying, oh, we don't have anyone to send you, sorry. But they do have people, and they're sending them to the higher paying clients. And that is heartbreaking, because some of these individuals, you know, we need to do better. And in fact, and this issue comes up also with, like, I don't know if you remember, but the mental health clinicians at Kaiser Permanente filed a complaint with the insurance commissioner and went on strike, because even a company like Kaiser Permanente, people pay for that insurance, some of them, and the referral took 3 months for a mental health clinician, 3 months. And I just imagine, like, going to a doctor because there's like a piece of metal in my eye or something, and then them telling me, well, we can get you seen by somebody, it will take 3 months. You know, it's this kind of disregard for that kind of service, mental health services, etc., that we must do better. We need to find ways, either different kinds of incentives to build up the workforce. And unfortunately, all the elements that make up a teacher, a mental health clinician, a home health aide, you know, a social worker in a school, they're all kind of competing at this point, because we're looking for people who are willing to get certification or training, and who are kind and compassionate, who want to make a difference in their communities. So it is really challenging. But one of the issues, and which, oh God, and I hate to do this, but then it goes back to the affordability of living in Hawaii. Because if people are fleeing and going to like Las Vegas, Nevada, or some other place in California or Texas, where they feel like the cost of living, the cost of rent, which is the #1 cost of living, rent, if that is much lower elsewhere and they're able to make more money, then we're losing. So what is the impact of foreign investment, you know, out-of-state investors who represent 40%, 40% of all private property is owned by out-of-state investors. We have 76,000 empty homes, 76,000 vacant habitable dwellings, according to the US Census that was just done in 2020. So this is all investors buying land here, causing the supply to be diminished, causing the rates to purchase and rent to go up. That's a problem. That's a policy that has not worked for local families. And now, as we see that what you described, Kathy, is how it impacts every single part of our life here, you know. And I feel like we need policymakers who can see the interconnectedness of all of these policies. And if you just give into the real estate lobbyists and the developer lobbyists, you know, then this is what we're going to end up with. Like, they have the most influence, the luxury developers, the real estate association, that's, you know, and if no one's willing to check them on that and to make policies that they are pushing up against or pushing back on, then we're not going to. And it's hard because the speaker's wife works for Title Escrow, and, you know, the speaker, we don't know who his clients are, his private practice attorney clients. I mean, I don't know, they could be developers, they could be we don't know. And there's no way of knowing that. So, but we do know that he and, you know, his family, his wife, are according to Civil Beat, they did bring in the largest amount of personal money into their reporting compared to any other representative in the House. So, you know, I don't know, we have to do better. And I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question, but I hope I did, but it does go out into many directions. So we have to bring all of these factors and be able to articulate how they're connected, so that people who are upset about not getting home health care will also be upset about our real estate policies, right? I mean, to say that this is having a direct impact. Anyway.
No, thank you, Kim. Actually,
Oh wait, Kathy was going to follow. I think Kathy was going to follow up, but you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm sorry. So what my take from this is that there are funds that could be available if we could just dig deep enough and get them to come up to the surface, and then get the legislators to do something with those. That's what I get.
Yes, and one of the hugest sources of funding that could be a gold mine for us, given the number of empty homes, 76,000, is if we had a surcharge on these empty homes. And the reason why that's important is because we use it to subsidize housing for all of these areas, right? All of these areas that are the workforce that we need. We could say, hey, you come here to Hawaii, we're going to offer you a stipend because we know the price of housing is ridiculous, but we need your skill sets. So for homeless, for working families, for workforce areas that are in short supply, we can recruit and get people to move here if we offered them stipends or kept people housed through these stipends funded. We can get like around, I think, $1.5 billion in revenue from charging a surcharge on empty homes. And the way we justify this is it's twofold. One is, when you keep units vacant, as they a lot are in Kakaako, the people who would normally be living in a unit, they would be going to the grocery store, going to the restaurant, going to the hair salon maybe, and every service or product they purchase, they would be paying general excise tax. They would be and then those individuals who benefit from the purchasing and servicing, they would be paying income tax. So there's all this lost revenue because we have this hollow pockets of housing that should not be just considered a commodity. Housing should be considered a human need, but had those empty spaces being occupied, people would be spending more money in that community, and that's its own circular economy where GET is raised, where income taxes are raised. So the fact that it's so desolate, it also another reason why we should charge this and why we're justified in charging this surcharge. And I just want to clarify, the state, until we change the Constitution, the state cannot technically tax property, but we can, I would argue, that we can charge a surcharge on keeping property vacant, right? Because of those financial impacts I just mentioned. But also it has when you have all of these empty units, let's say in Kakaako downtown, what we saw during the pandemic when the streets were empty, right? It felt a little, for some people, it felt a little less safe to go out walking around, right? So there's been lots written about how Kakaako feels like a ghost town at night, unless there's an event happening. And so people, the more vibrant the economy is in a particular community, the more people who are living there, walking, there'll be more people on the street. It will actually feel and perhaps be safer as well to have all of those units occupied. The surcharge would disincentivize foreign investors, and it would obviously then open up for more local residents to purchase units and possibly bring the price down. I don't know, but yeah, so that's kind of my solution to where that untapped revenue source is.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. All right, Greg, you're up next.
I only unmuted or stopped the video. Hi, Kim, how are you? I'm Greg. I'm one of the directors on the Kokua Council. And I noticed on your bio, before I ask the question I'm going to ask you, I noticed on your bio that you lived in San Francisco for a period of time. And I moved here from San Francisco. I lived there for 11 years. So I am familiar with the homeless outreach team there also. I did some advocacy for some of our neighbors that were at risk. And I appreciate, that you are very involved in that. That's something that's close to heart. I'm also concerned about crime, and one of the reasons that I moved to San Francisco with my significant other is because there were a lot of crime issues that were expanding within San Francisco, and we finally realized that it wasn't as safe as it used to be, and we felt that, you know, Hawaii was the place to go. My significant other is fourth generation Japanese American, and her family is originally from the Big Island. So my question to you, which is focused on the recent House Bill 1567, and I'm reading off a piece of paper just so I word it properly, is had you been the district representative in the last session, what would have been your position on HB 1567, the cash bail reform, and how would you have voted? And do you support Governor Ige's veto of this bill?
Thank you. So thank you. That's so straight up, I do support the reform of cash bail. This isn't it's not fair. It feels like injustice to actually incarcerate people. I mean, isn't this like Charles Dickinson, this idea that you can incarcerate poor people for being poor, but we let the rich people out because they can pay their bail. I mean, there's something that feels very not right about that. And I'm not trying to, disregard victims of crimes. And some of these are like nonviolent crimes, like having something stolen from you, so that never feels right. But there's something that doesn't sit right with me. The idea that people can sit in jail. There's families that are impacted, obviously, by them sitting and not being adjudicated yet. The justice system is taking so long, and maybe we put pressure on both ends to say the judiciary, here's more money, hire more judges, get people processed quicker, so the time they have is sped up. But also something that's really disconcerting is a lot of prosecutors use the lack of cash bail and the fact that their clients are so poor and can't afford it, to prosecutors who use it to try to get a plea bargain, which can have so even if you're not guilty, they're going to say, well, had you pled guilty, you could have been out by now. Oh my God. And how horrific. It feels like to me like a nightmare if you're caught in that situation, of not having the resources to get yourself out. And yet this pressure to plead guilty to something you may not have done because you would spend less time in jail. I mean, it's just the incarceral system has so many problems, and is racist. And I feel like I feel very comfortable saying that. So knowing that it's unfair and it's racist and there's so many issues happening, I'm okay erring on the side of a non-violent offender not being held when they haven't been found guilty. And are there other ways? Because all the incarceration of these individuals is just about making sure they show up to trial. And there are numerous other tools that can be used to facilitate that, and yeah, so I think there's ways around it. And also I was very disturbed by the prosecutor, when he was asked by the ACLU, and I think I was on the board at the time, when he was asked when he was campaigning if he supports cash bail reform, he said yes to the ACLU, and they put it on their flyer, etc. But one of the things that he didn't, they should have asked him, because he was, I think, maybe one of the few judges, if not the only judges, having been a judge and having the discretion, have you actually used your discretion to do? And I don't think he had. I think he had been asked about that, but I can't say for sure. My memory may be wrong, but preserving allowing judges to have discretion is also important, but having it, yeah, there's just so much injustice. I don't see how prolonging the injustice is going to make it better. Also, I think it's so expensive to incarcerate people who may not be guilty. Are there other ways that we could use that money more productively? Are there more services? I mean, people only commit crimes out of oftentimes an act of need, right? The nonviolent crimes. There's a need that's not being met. And so I want to, deposit the question, is there a different way that we could address the need so that people don't feel like they need to steal or do other nonviolent crimes to get their needs met? And what we saw with the pandemic and the extra $600 if you're unemployed, that's a form of universal basic income. And a lot of people who didn't support universal basic income before, who were suddenly beneficiaries in a way of a modified universal basic income, suddenly said, wow, this is great. You know what I mean? Like, we have needs and this is helping us take care of our needs. So I'm just putting it out there that there may be other ways that will save the state and counties more money without, and also create more safety in our communities, and taking away the factors are the reasons why people commit nonviolent crimes.
Thank you very much for that response.
Okay, is there a follow-up question from you?
No, that's okay. I'm gonna let it move on so other people can get their questions, and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kim and Greg. Gary, your question, please.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Lila. I'm Gary. I'm one of the directors this is actually a county question, but I'd love your insight. We began this rail nightmare, I guess, is it 11 years ago, 2011? And yeah, it's employed a lot of construction people, but the tree as it's envisioned hasn't borne any fruit in terms of transportation. And maybe I'm wrong. I can foresee this rail just begging the legislature for money every year to keep operating. What do you envision as a way out? People are they're just numb to this rail. They're just sick of it. They don't want to talk about it. And they feel powerless against the machine. Your insight on it?
Yeah, thank you. So, just as a community organizer, activist, a lot of my thoughts come from actually having conversations with other people. So I don't want to, some of my thoughts are totally 100% original. But many of them come from conversations. And actually, so I have a conversation with Kakaako, and who's running for city council, and reading his Civil Beat questionnaire, which is so well written. He talks about alternative funding sources for completing rail. And I thought his point was well taken. He offered up that in Japan, rail mass transit was funded by the real estate developers who would benefit by these transit oriented real estate, and that they should be the one paying, because they're going to capitalize, they're going to capture profits. Whether it's, creating little cafes or housing along the rail line. There's so many things that they could do with the property along the rail line or near the stops. So he proposed that they be the ones to pay for that, or there be some kind of, so that would be one way of dealing with it. Another way is, people are also upset about the number of trees that will come down because of rail as it comes into this final stretch. And so, I'm not sure, and we're doing safe streets and where we're going to be closing down certain streets to cars and making it more pedestrian and bike friendly. Why can't we have the rail actually hit the ground, be cheaper? We won't have to cut down the trees, but shut down certain roads to traffic, to vehicles, and create barriers that pop up so that when cars are moving, so it's really clear about when cars are crossing a thoroughfare and when the rail is. But I think there are other ways to do this in a way that would be cost saving. And also, yeah, it would save the cost, because I personally would not support, especially raising GET, which we know is a regressive form of taxation. Yeah, where, you know, lower income households are paying more GET, more like a larger share of their personal household income than the wealthiest families. So definitely when they did that, I would not have supported that. I want to see the building industry trades. Clearly, I want them to be working. We have lots of city projects that need to be done. Obviously, our schools need to be kept up, rebuilt. There's a lot of work already waiting. There's a lot of affordable housing that needs to be built. So definitely everyone who's in construction, there's work for them. That, you know, so yeah, there's work that needs to be done. And so I don't feel like the rail is the end all be all. And also, quite frankly, I've spoken to contractors who have been bringing in workers from the mainland, and they get them local cell phones, a cell phone with a local billing address, and they show that to meet the requirement of hiring local. And so that, you know what I mean? Like that, there's this whole idea that rail is to keep local builders working. I'm like, that doesn't feel right if contractors are getting local bill cell phones for imported workers. But anyway, I hope did I answer your question directly enough?
No, you did. Get these expenses down, and my follow-up is, it's a rhetorical question, and I don't expect an answer for you. It's just for everybody in the room and our audience. After 11 years and tens of billions of dollars, are we better off, and will we be better off? Thank you.
Yeah.
No.
Well, can I just respond to that? What we do
Yeah.
know is that these international construction, you know, the people who first put, they go from municipality to municipality. Basically, I mean, they know that every single baby rail that gets adopted by a municipality, they know, because this happens everywhere, it will expand like 3, 4, 5 times the initial amount. It's part of their business model. They know that, and they play us. They play every municipality, because quite frankly, a lot of the people that we elect, people don't have the expertise to see these things. And even though they get warnings, they ignore them. But I am just saying that there are countries that have signed, like even Argentina, they've signed these contracts with the World Monetary Fund and the IMF, or they signed these deals, and they don't have the capacity or the expertise, and then they contract to get stuck into these deals that leave their countries bankrupt generations to come. So we're not the first, we're not going to be the last. You know what I mean? It's a business model. It's a strategy that works.
Yeah, thank you for the bad news. Okay. Thank you, Lila.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Gary. All right, Doug, your question, please.
Hi, Kim Coco. Thanks for showing up. I have a question. I warn you, I'm going to have a follow-up question, and you've answered some of these before. One of Kokua Council's issues, of course, is aging in place. My question is actually more of an affordable housing question. It's about a place to age. And one of the things I do is I participate in Food Not Bombs at Thomas Square every Sunday for the last 10 years, more than 10 years. We see more and more seniors out there who are presumably unhoused or underhoused and hungry. Now, other municipalities, other countries have various forms of rent control. They limit the amount you can raise the rent. They limit, if you've been a long-term tenant, they limit the ability to evict. If you want to evict, you have to show cause, and that sort of thing. Are you willing to consider some form of rent control, and what kind, especially to help seniors have a place to age in place? And I wish I could say I was asking for a friend, but I have a certain amount of self-interest in this.
Yes.
I'm going to be 70 years old on Friday.
Yes. Well, so first of all, thank you, Doug, for feeding so many of our neighbors. Thank you for that. And I know you're not doing it to get any kind of gratitude, but I feel so grateful. Yes, I am totally down for rent control. I am a landlord, and I don't raise rents very often. There was a situation where one of the tenants let the water run for 2 months, and the water bill was really huge, and I did raise the rent by $25, but generally speaking, that's not I try to keep, if I can pay my bills, and actually I have to share with you that when I go door knocking for a lot of these 2-story walk-ups, I am surprised by all the older people who've been living there for years. And I know that their landlord is informally doing some kind of rent control for them. You know what I mean? But that's not sustainable. That's not going to cut it for all of the individuals that you're seeing, and who aren't, and then what happens when the family member of whoever owns that building passes, and it gets passed down to the next generation? Are they going to want to keep these people? And there's no guarantee. But if we change the law, then we can have that. It would also be another way to disincentivize the commodification of real estate, of housing again. I mean, I talked about this before. We have to move away, or we have to acknowledge and affirm that housing is a human need, and make sure we prioritize that over housing as a commodity, as something you could make lots of profit from. So I do support it. Also, Peter Savio has spoken about this, about his aunt who had rent control in New York City. At the beginning of her life, she moved in her 30s or something into a rent-controlled apartment. And because the rent never went up, her salary went up over time. So she was able to actually, generate equity. So there's 2 ways of getting equity, right? One is if you purchase a home and you sell the home later for more money, or the value goes up, and you can get a home equity loan off of that increase and whatever. So that's a home buyer. The other way to create equity is rent control. And then that way, people who have a controlled rent, but hopefully their wages go up over 30 years, right? So if you go in 30, you come out by 60, hopefully your wages have gone up and your rent stays the same, and you're able to create a safety net for yourself as you go into retirement. So yes, I'm a huge support. Sorry, did I?
Yeah.
If I answered your question, then you can go into your follow-up.
Yeah, no, I have a
Okay.
follow-up, and I'm glad to hear I just wanted to say, I visited Germany. I visited 2 cities, Göttingen, that used to be in West Germany, Leipzig, that used to be in East Germany. No homeless people on the street. They have rent control legislation. They have 5 main parties. They actually have 9 parties that have at least 1 representative on the federal legislature, the Bundestag. they have a very powerful Green Party. The vice chancellor is a Green. They have a federal ministry for family affairs, senior citizens, women and youth, and that minister is a Green Party person. We in Hawaii, we got one party, basically. To get legislation passed, you gotta play with these guys. There's no competition. They're all in one party. I'm not going to vote for a Republican probably because they're just personal opinion. That's a dog of a party, you know. Where Kokua Council is nonpartisan, so I'm not, you know, I'm just expressing my own opinion about that. But we need more parties. I mean, we can't have a functional legislature with one effing party. That's ridiculous. How are you going to pass legislation if you got to deal with one party? And do you have any kind of solution for this? And this might be a brainstorming question. It might not be something, you know, you thought of before, but
no, this is exactly why I'm running. I mean, I feel like for me, it's not just about party. It's about the way that we don't have a dynamic, trusting, open process within the deliberation within our party. I also don't like the fact that the legislature has exempted itself from the Sunshine Law, which means they can go into caucus and then leadership can bully the less powerful representatives into submission, right? If we didn't have that kind of walled off privacy, and it was a more transparent process, would there be better ideas coming forward? Would people see how obvious and blatant the reward and punishment structure of the current leadership is, and then call them out and hold them accountable? Having a more open process will be messier, but I also hope that the results will be more people-oriented, Hawaii resident focused, the needs of the community, as you mentioned, elders who are on a limited kind of income, and there's no hope of supplementing their income. So what they got is what they got. And so we need to make sure they're housed with those limitations. So yes, I feel like we could have the best and brightest ideas come to the surface if we didn't have the structure that is currently in place within the party, right? If we expanded, and I use the term democratize, right? Bring that kind of representational democracy back into the House. And we'll get that. And we don't need to pass a statute. We can do that all through, the House rules. And that's why I hope to work with and meet with as many representatives as possible for swearing in to say, let's agree that we could do better in the way we process things to bring out the best ideas. So yeah, I mean, at this point, I would prefer I think there is power to having a robust opposition party, or even 3, or like you mentioned, 9 parties, having these broad dialogues. But if we're gonna have that broad dialogue between parties, why can't we have that broad dialogue within one party? As long as we're having the dialogue, do you know what I'm saying? As long as people aren't being punished, or, their bills are all gonna be killed because they spoke out against one issue in a bill that was introduced by the speaker, that we're never gonna get to the solutions we need. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, thanks for your thoughts on that.
Okay, so we'll go on to our next question from Dale. Dale, are you ready?
Oh, yes. Well, much thanks to Kim for putting up with us today. Yeah, we need some fresh air down at the Capitol. I've been going down there for the last few years. Very frustrating. But in the realm of housing, today about 40% of our population is in these homeowner associations. And I was in one for 3.5 decades, found myself on the board skirmishing with the management companies, several of them. something they do is withhold voting rights from people unless they can attend a meeting in person. And they actually got Linda Lingle to put it in the 514B back in 2005 that, oh, you got to be there in person. So we need a voting rights bill to require the homeowners associations to respect and enable the members to vote. Presently, we don't have that. We tried the last session, got killed in the House. And to my astonishment, in the Senate, they had a hearing on it after the House killed it, which made no sense. Then to amuse themselves, the chair did a gut and replace. And the committee members sit there like puppets. They don't even ask questions. They just agree with the chair. I guess they don't want to get in trouble. So the question is, as a legislator, will you be willing to introduce a bill, voting rights bill for homeowner association members that they could vote whether they're in a meeting or not? And also, along with that, would you be willing to testify in favor of the bill?
Absolutely.
Submit written testimony in favor of it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this. And I remember this came up last time as well, and I apologize for not following this issue. But you know, you're right. And one of the reasons, so lots of the way a lot of homeowner associations start off, right? When a new building is built, the developer often has control over the homeowner association. So they don't want to create an opportunity so they want to hold on to that power as long as possible. And so when you think about the interest that our current representative, the current speaker has, his interest and who's influencing his decisions, it's a lot of the developers, right? They're putting up his banners all over our district. You know, I mean, so they are definitely, he's definitely representing their interests and not necessarily the interests of individual homeowners who are living in their units. He's representing a lot of the investors. Developers are investors, so he's representing the investors and what they do. So yes, we have to change the way, the power that they have, but also, I mean, we've seen numerous kinds of violations or bad actors on behalf of, even what happened to Kei Kilohana regarding the maintenance fees jumping up after it being, after it was finally handed over to the homeowners, and they were told stuff like, well, if you can afford the jacked up maintenance, the 100% increase in maintenance, you could sell your unit, and it's like, wait a minute, a lot of them didn't buy it's one of the things also that's really hurtful is that for some of these workforce or affordable, they have to income qualify to even purchase it. So everyone knows what their income is. Everyone knows what they can and cannot afford, right? So how do you justify jacking up their maintenance fee beyond what they cannot afford because you've seen their financials? So once again, but every time you sell, it benefits a realtor gets their wings, right? So that's the problem that we have to address as well. But that imbalance between developers, individual homeowners, and then how it continues even many years after. And I think just recently, I'm not sure if you live in the, oh my God, I'm blanking out on the two elliptical buildings. I just blanked out on, but they just recently, I think, voted to get actual the non-developer person to be chair of their AOAO. So look how long that's been, right? So yeah, so we definitely need to make sure that that the meeting requirement doesn't benefit, doesn't silence or disempower or marginalize the vote of the individual homeowner. Yeah, so yes, I will definitely.
Oh, thank you. It's just to make mention, when the companies perpetrate these double-digit increases, year after year after year. The people can barely make ends meet on fixed income to buy into it in the first place. Find themselves priced out and have to triage their income like food and medicine or maintenance fees.
Yes.
That's why so many people leave Hawaii.
Yes.
They can't afford to stay here anymore.
Yes, it's heartbreaking. But also, you know, what's interesting too, though, is that the building I just mentioned, people are upset because they never raised the maintenance fees. And so it deferred all this maintenance, and now things are kind of maybe falling apart a little bit. I mean, you know, so there's this, it's a balancing thing. Yeah, there's this, yeah. I mean, so it is complicated. Building management is complicated. But yeah, definitely addressing how do we support people aging in place and staying in their homes and not being flippantly told, well, you could just sell your unit, you know, and that's not, there has to be other ways. There could even be financing opportunities. Like, why can't the AOAO have a situation where other members of the AOA see maybe an investment opportunity where they put a little bit extra in, and then when the property passes down to if somebody can't pay for their increased maintenance, maybe there's somebody else who can, and then like a lien or some kind of situation, if there's ever a quick claim deed or if it ever sells, that the AOAO gets the money back. I mean, there has to be other solutions instead of just evicting people who can't afford. Like yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Just to let you know, I had a coalition of condo owners, and I'd love to discuss this issue with you more in detail. But let's go on to the next question. Rick Tabor, are you ready?
I can. Did Dawn want to ask a question, though? She came in later.
No.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. So, Kim, you've covered an incredible amount of ground here. And my second question, a little bit piggybacks on a little bit of a few things you've covered. I want to point out that recently at Pavia, we had Hilton presented a training and talked about how our nurses have the highest paid salary in the nation. Our cost of living brings us down to the fourth from the bottom as far as being able to survive here. And so some of this was Doug's questions about, the rent stuff, the cost of living stuff, bring it into check. I came here in 1976 and this issue was an issue. It is now 2022 and it's not gotten any better, right? So I say all of that. You also point out the autocratic top-down leadership issue that we deal with without having the sunshine. But without us being able to hear what's going on, it's very hard for the public to even understand what all happens here, which creates, if you will, no transparency. We don't know what's happening. There were bills this year that we thought were going to go through and they didn't, and we're still trying to figure out why, and that goes on every single year. So my question to you is, what would you do if, when you are elected, and you find yourself, you end up finding yourself in strong disagreement with the leadership and the mandates that become state or federal law due to false narratives, ideology, personal kinds of, issues, and the conflicts affect your constituents' rights. So this is about to happen. If Congress federally, becomes Republican, all these trigger issues that we've fought for the rights for years and years and years, LGBT, abortion, gun, all that stuff is going to be affected. So you, elected in your position here, what do you do with all of that?
Well, we can start by codifying what is most meaningful to us, whether it's environmental issues. The gun issue is going to be harder because it's being positioned as a constitutional right of the gun carrier, right? Whereas abortion is more the individual right of, under our Constitution, the Hawaii Constitution, one would see it as an individual right of the person the pregnant person, to navigate that between herself and her physician and all that. So there's, and then LGBT issues would obviously be fall under privacy of our state constitution. But then again, the rights of, of a baker to bake a cake for a gay wedding, or to not bake, right, to refuse, and that would be their protecting their individual rights. So yes, we are going to come to a head for sure on a lot of issues, and so we will either, if we have to codify things, or maybe open up to, propose more constitutional amendments, because that is actually more powerful than, but you cannot ever limit, your state constitution can never limit the rights granted by the US Constitution. You can offer more rights, but you can't limit. So that's where the gun thing is going to be challenging, and we'll have to see where that goes. But otherwise, codifying things or being more creative and in how we're gonna, like, what language to use. For instance, in our abortion law can be, we can codify things, we can clarify the definition of what does access mean and what does viable mean. Like, we can define that in our state statute, because that's what basically the Dobbs decision said. It's like, okay, all you states figure it out, you know what I mean? So here we've been given this task, and so how are we going to make sure that we are addressing these issues to serve our residents and their health and access to health care? Did I answer your question?
I'm going to add one other layer. It feels like the past many years, we've spent so much time on trigger issues, we haven't really dealt with the real issues that affect everyone. How do we get past these trigger issues, deal with the workforce, the cost of living? We're aging longer, than ever. We all want to age in place. How do we help a person do that? Medicare, Medicaid doesn't even cover in-home care. How do we make it that all happens? Instead of focusing on all these other big trigger issues, this is just my personal thought. How do we get more nonpartisan and bridge this gap and work together going forward?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that's where we need to start. So one of the things that changed in the legislature is the way bills are introduced. You actually, well, at least in the Senate, people would circulate their bills. So everyone gets to read it and they have time to read it. In the past, they would carry paper bills to the offices of the people they wanted the co-sign. And it was this weird hierarchy. But with COVID and less people interacting, they started sending it digitally. And so everyone got to read every single bill. And it was much easier to sign on to bills, or to actually look and examine what some problems were with some of the details. But it did generate more substance and less personality. It felt like it opened it up to more people weighing in on bills, which we want to invite people to have the opportunity to sign on. Like, I think Favela, being the only Republican in the Senate, he signed on to a lot of, Democratic introduced bills. And I think there was some Democratic senators who signed on to his bill. You know what I mean? So there felt like there was way more that kind of circulation and less opportunity to be hierarchical and petty and to perpetuate that kind of the divisiveness. So hopefully that'll continue. Hopefully people's experience they were positive across the board, and they'll continue to expand on that. Any opportunity to collaborate and to also call it out. Like, I've heard legislators who I respected say things like, oh, we're going to kill that bill because a Republican introduced it, and we'll introduce it next year and we'll pass it next year. I'm like, it's gross and petty. So if it happens within a party, petty. If it happens to another party, that's still petty. It's still denying the public the solution they desperately need. So we need to just call it out and be able to say, I think there's a way to do that, to basically call out when that kind of rhetoric is not helpful, and then also to steer people towards and showing them examples of like, hey, we don't agree on this issue, but that doesn't mean we can't work on this issue, you know, and showing more of those examples instead of everyone getting all personal and petty. Yeah, I think it's really important. You know, I mean, for one example is that, you know, working, you know, supporting bills that, you know, Senator Gabbard introduced, you know, around environment stuff, you know, and being like, you know, thank you, Senator, for introducing this. I'm not talking to the senator who was very anti-LGBT or who may still be in some ways. I'm going to speak to the senator who wants to do something better for the environment.
Right.
You know, and it takes a level of maturity to do that. And also a sense of, I think, for me, the maturity, but a sense of a clear sense of priorities. Like, this isn't about me, it's about the people we're serving.
Now, if we just get back to working together, that would be great. I really appreciate it, Kim Coco.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. It's amazing that the time went so quickly. You know, we were talking about 1 hour or 90 minutes. We're coming up on 90 minutes. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to summarize and talk about things that you haven't been able, we haven't asked, and you haven't been able to expound on it in these last 85 minutes or so. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Again, thank you again so much for this opportunity. So generous to give me all of this time and asking questions that were challenging. And I hope I answered, I hope I gave clear answers, because that's what I would expect from my representative. So last election, we worked really hard and we came in 167 votes short of unseating the most powerful person in the legislature. And I'm hoping we're all working that much harder and more volunteers are coming on board to get us over the finish line this time. You know, since the last election, two things happened that were the most egregious for me is obviously the corruption issue just got exposed and highlighted, but also the issue about Red Hill and what we saw there and what people really don't know about Red Hill. Obviously, Ernie Lau has been trying to warn, you know, all the decision makers across the state about what's happening with the leaking fuel tanks, and he was just constantly ignored. I joined with the Sierra Club of Hawaii to start testifying at the legislature about stepping in on Red Hill. And I just have to say, at the same time, Ernie Lau, Sierra Club, many other environmental activists were testifying about shutting down Red Hill. The legislature and the legislative leaders were giving grant and aid to the tune of $1.25 million of government, state taxpayer funded grant and aid to the Chamber of Commerce Military Affairs Council so that they could lobby the same legislators who gave them money. Now they're going to use that money to lobby the legislators to kill any bill that would have monitored, regulated, or shut down Red Hill. And then what happened was, after all the other more leaks happened, that's when the legislature said, oh, we're going to shut down Red Hill after every 90,000 people were poisoned. And after our aquifer has been irreparably, you know, contaminated. It's so, it makes me so angry that they could do that to our residents and not be called out on it. I have to say, I sent all this data to both media, both the Civil Beat and Star Advertiser, and I urge them to talk about what happened, because this is the part of, you know, and again, we saw Speaker's cozy relationship with the Chamber of Commerce when they kept working families in poverty. We saw that intimacy. And then what we saw was then the legislature giving the Chamber of Commerce 1.25 million. And then, you know, I do know that there are some members of the Chamber of Commerce who do give quite generously to legislative leadership. So it becomes this weird closed economy of a different sort. And yeah, so they need to be held accountable to this kind of injustice to the people of Hawaii to the residents who rely on that water. And not just pat themselves on the back that after it's too late, that they, oh, we passed the bill to shut down right now after it's too late. But anyway, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to share what I've learned and to share what I hope to do if given the opportunity to represent my district. Thanks again.
Kim Coco, thank you very much for joining us. It was a quick 90 minutes. We learned so much from you, and we hope that we can extract from your promise that should you win the district, you'll come for another 90 minutes with us.
Yes.
Some of the words that you used are words that we use among ourselves. You talked about the pettiness, the grossness, the retaliatory nature, and we've experienced that ourselves. So we hope to see some changes. Like you, we would like to see some maturity at the legislature, and that the legislators, whoever, you know, they elect, that when they're elected, they realize that they're being elected to be the people's servant, and that they serve the people rather than we serve them. So thank you very much. And to Kokua Council's board, thank you for joining us. To everyone, we really appreciate your attention and time. Kim, thank you so much. Aloha, everyone. Take care.